Hello and welcome to this ISM webinar on an introduction to Grants of the Arts Council's application scheme. My name's Ben Lane. I am a Senior Relationship Manager at the Arts Council. I'll explain in a minute a little bit more about what that means. First of all though, a few technical points. Firstly, you can't see me, which is probably a good thing because I need a haircut. However, you should be able to see my PowerPoint presentation. You should also be able to hear me, but of course I can't hear you. So if you do have any questions, please type them in the questions box and I'll answer as many of them as I can at the end of the presentation. Finally, before I get going, the webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM's website at ism.org/webinars. Okay, so here we go. As I said before, my name is Ben Lane. I'm a Senior Relationship Manager for the Arts Council. I have worked for the Arts Council for about 8 years, originally as a music specialist in the Brighton office. I've also worked nationally within our music team, and I'm currently, as it says there, a Senior Relationship Manager, which means I manage a team of relationship managers across various art form disciplines. The presentation today, we're going to focus on Grants of the Arts. Just to take you through the structure of this a bit though, what I'm going to do first is talk about the Arts Council, just for a bit of context about who we are and what we do. Then I'll jump straight into Grants of the Arts. We will talk about what Grants of the Arts is, eligibility, who is eligible and what kind of activity can be applied for. We'll talk about how to apply. We'll talk about the application form and what it asks of you. I'll talk a little bit about decisions and how those are made. And then finally at the end, I've given you a slide with some links to further reading and some helpful videos. I think as well this presentation will be available for you to take away so you can follow those links. Okay. So, who we are. Arts Council England is the country's arts development agency. We are a non-departmental public body, an NDPO, or as used to be known as Quangos. We have an arm's length relationship to the government, which means that we effectively kind of act on their behalf. We are a strategic body focusing on shaping the future of the arts in England, and there are similar agencies in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We have head offices in London and Manchester, and then we also have regional offices across the 5 areas that we define across England. You'll see there on the slide, the North, the Midlands, East and South East, London and the South West. A bit more about what we do. So you'll see there our kind of mission statement. Arts Council England champions, develops and invests in artistic and cultural experiences that enrich people's lives. 3 words in there that are kind of key, that kind of define what we do. The first of those, champions. We do have what we kind of term an overview of the whole of the arts sector across England, and we have a relationship with government and other similar bodies and agencies that enables us to advocate and champion the arts and the value of those in society. Secondly, develops. We are a development body, a development agency, so we take that overview that we develop from all of our experiences of funding and we identify gaps and work to try and solve those and fill strategic needs. Finally, probably the one you're most interested in is invests. So this is our funding function, and we do this in a number of ways, which I'll come on to detail a little bit more in a minute. You'll see there also about the range of activities we fund. What's worth pointing out here is that we also have, as well as the art forms, we also have a remit that includes museums and libraries. So actually you'll hear us talk a lot about the value of arts and culture. So we take this kind of broader overview. Our strapline mission statement is great art for everyone, and you'll hear me saying that several times. It's quite important. It's fairly short and fairly brief, but actually it encapsulates a lot of what we're going to talk about in a minute with Grants of the Arts. So the great art being, of course, the kind of quality, and then the for everyone bit being about those experiences being for as broad a range of people as possible. A bit of information here about our investment, so you get an idea of the scale of the investment we make. So between 2015 and 2018, the current funding cycle, we'll invest 1.1 billion of public money from the government, that's from the Treasury, so that's taxpayers' money, and an estimated 700 million from the National Lottery. So it's worth pointing out that both of those sources are, of course, money from the public. But going back to talking about great art for everyone really defines why the everyone part of it is so important to us. That money has come from the public in England, and so it's very important to us that we get as much of the value as we can of our investment back to as many people as we can. Just to break this down a bit further, there are three main ways in which we invest, which I've listed for you here. The first of those, the first bullet point, national portfolio funding. You may be aware of, you may have heard talk of NPOs. So there's a national portfolio organisations. This is a portfolio of about 600 organisations across England, excuse me, who we define as being the kind of the backbone, the infrastructure of arts and culture in England. And we fund these usually on a 3-year cycle, and just about to actually come up to another investment period, so that's going to keep us busy for quite a few months. Secondly, you'll see there strategic funds. I mentioned at the beginning our role as a development agency. Strategic funds are where we spot gaps and where we spot actions or activities that need to happen in order to develop the arts infrastructure. So this is our kind of tool for problem solving, and this ranges across a whole variety of situations, from helping people to fundraise better to running more bespoke things that target specific issues within art forms. Finally, the most important one for today, Grants of the Arts. This is our open access fund. It is a reactive fund. It responds to need, it responds to what people kind of want from it, and is probably, as we'll come on to talk about, one of our most important development tools for supporting the arts in England. Okay, so that's the context. Let's get into a bit more of the detail. So, as I mentioned a minute ago, Grants of the Arts is a key feature of how we deliver on our mission, great art and culture for everyone. It distributes awards of between £1,000 and up to £100,000. All of the money from Grants of the Arts comes from the National Lottery, and we make awards to a really wide variety of situations, and I'll come on in a minute to talk a little bit more about those. It is open to individuals, it's open to arts organisations, and you'll see there as well people who use the arts in their work. I'll unpack that a bit more in a minute. What that's kind of saying is it isn't just about arts organisations and artists. It can also support organisations who want to work with arts organisations and artists. You'll see underneath there it says for time-limited arts-related activities. That's just a kind of fancy way of saying projects. What it doesn't do is fund ongoing activities. So it won't fund an orchestra, for example, just to be an orchestra. It funds things that have a defined beginning and an end, which is the time-limited part in that. It funds things that benefit people in England, and again, that's quite important to understand. So this is about the benefit of this funding going back to people living and working in England, and then it's there to help artists and organisations in England carry out their work. We first launched this scheme in April 2003. It brought together, there was I think before that time, this is before my time at the Arts Council, we had an awful lot of small funding schemes doing a lot of different things. So Grants of the Arts brought a lot of things together into one fund with a very kind of open access, wide front door that was basically to enable it to be as responsive as it could be according to need. In terms of budget, it's not our largest allocation of funding at 77 million for the upcoming year. However, as I said before, it is very important to us because of that, because of its reactive nature, because it responds to need. You'll see I've said there it's customer focused and there's a kind of equality of opportunity. What I'm trying to say there is about this kind of idea that it's open access and that there is some level of consistency there. It should hopefully be easy to understand and there are no hidden agendas. It doesn't require prior knowledge of the Arts Council England, although that is helpful. And it really exists as both an excellence and an access fund. Applicants are appraised on what's written in their application rather than whether or not they have a prior relationship with Arts Council England. So the idea being that, and this is quite important, the chances of you getting funded rely very much on what you write in that application form. It's light touch. I guess light touch is kind of a depends who you're asking, but it is public money, so there's a degree of accountability there. However, we do make it as light touch as we possibly can be with that. What I mean by that is that you make your application, then we're able to say yes or no, and then you're given the money with a relatively small amount of things to do in terms of meeting payment conditions. Quick decisions. Again, I think quick is a relative term. In terms of funders, though, we're pretty good. So it depends how much you apply for, and we'll talk about that again in a minute. But if you're applying for up to £15,000, you'll get a decision within 6 weeks. If you're applying for more than £15,000, then that decision will take 12 weeks. Okay. So, eligibility. I'm not going to read all of these out. These are just to give you an idea of the real wide range of situations that Grants of the Arts is suitable for. So really this is just a snapshot. I think we're continually surprised by the variety of projects that do come in to Grants of the Arts. However, there are some key common attributes, I think, between all of these. So these are for time-limited projects, as I've already said, and they're all about engaging people in England. I think that something else, though, to point out is that there is a real breadth here in terms of what you can apply for, and it's kind of down to you to bring that to us. I'll talk a little bit more as we get into the presentation about what makes a good application, but one thing I would say now, just to kind of get you thinking, is that probably the most successful applications usually are public-facing, usually result in some kind of public-facing activity. So I guess really here I'm talking about some kind of performance, something that has an audience. who can apply. Again, I'm not going to read through all of these. These are just here to give you an idea of the real breadth of people that can make applications. So yes, it's about arts organisations, yes, it's about artists, but actually it can also be for people who want to work with artists and arts organisations. We don't just fund, like some funders, charities. We are able to fund individuals, unconstituted groups, even profit-making companies. However, they have to be able to show a budget, a balanced budget, and that these activities are all related to the arts. So there we go, activities. So we can't fund activities that are not arts related. That's a double negative. You know what I mean? Activities, this second one again, activities that provide no potential benefit to the public either in the short or long term. It's worth unpicking this one a little bit because, and particularly in the case of individuals, it's sometimes easy to fall foul of something we call self-promotion. So you would have picked up by now, I keep talking a lot about public benefit and this being a real key feature here. So because of that national lottery money, because this is a key feature of the national lottery legislation and the idea that it funds good causes, it is about providing that benefit back to the public. So if you're thinking, I want funding to buy a guitar, then that would probably be no, because that's about benefiting you as an individual. However, if you're running a project that results in some kind of public performance, then that, as you can see, is about taking that benefit back to the public. Short or long term, I've been talking about performance. There is also a way of arguing for long-term public benefit, and this particularly applies if you're thinking about something like research and development, where the public benefit, where the public outcome might not be immediate, but might be something about developing a product, developing a service, where that benefit is something that is going to happen in the longer term outside of the application. Finally, that final point, really what that's saying is we don't fund retrospective activities. So we can't fund things that you have already done. We can't pay for things that you've already bought before you start your application. Here's a few more. I've already talked about this first one. So we don't fund general running costs and we don't fund overheads. Having said that, that doesn't mean that we don't support what I call full cost recovery. So if you are running a project and it's going to take your time to manage and deliver that project, those costs are completely admissible within the application. However, as I was saying earlier, what we don't fund is for you just to be. We don't fund the purchase of second-hand equipment. We don't fund activities or events mainly taking place outside England. There are some exceptions to that. What we look for example, a good example here would be somebody who would like to take something on tour and wants to take it into Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, for example. What we look for here is that our money is not funding any more than 15% of that activity. There are also, and I haven't seen these for a long time, but sometimes it may be that somebody would like to visit another country to observe other musical traditions, to learn from those and then to bring those back. So again, that might be permissible, but what we'd be looking for here is about what is being brought back and how that benefits people living and working in England. Finally, film or video production. And this is an interesting one. Of course, you may have, if you are interested in funding a film and video, this is also funded by the BFI. So there's a need to be quite clear about the distinction between those two. However, we do fund work that supports artists' work in the moving image. I won't go into a big kind of description of what that is at the moment because I'm not sure how useful that is, but you can find out more about that on our website. Okay, so let's move into how we make an application. So, before you apply, a little bit of homework is probably, a little bit of homework and research is a good idea. We have a very comprehensive website. There is a lot of information there, and I think probably the place to start is to read the how to apply guidance. I've given you a link at the end of this presentation which will take you to the relevant web page. You'll find a link to that how to apply guidance on there. You'll also find there's a big library of information sheets which can help you in specific situations. There are a few there that are specific to music. There is one about purchasing musical instruments. There is another, for example, that particularly looks at how we fund contemporary popular music. Finally, you can contact us to discuss eligibility, and again at the end I've given you our customer services number. So we have an expert team of advisors in Manchester who you can phone up to discuss any concerns, questions you have around eligibility. They can also direct you to relationship manager in the relevant office where you have specific questions relating to Artform. I would encourage you to actually go to the website first though, just so that you've kind of read and understood all the stuff that's there. It can just help focus your questions so that you kind of get the best advice that you can when you do contact us. So the next bit I'm going to move into gets a little bit technical. I'm going to talk to you about our applications portal and what you need to do in order to start making an application. So we'll go through that, and then I want to kind of go into the application form a bit more and talk about some of the questions you're going to be asked and the kind of considerations around those. So first of all, let's talk about Grantium. Grantium is our online application portal, and this has come in fairly recently. It's a fairly new thing for us. It's actually helped us reduce our spending on administration, and so effectively enables us to give more money back to the arts. Because it's a fairly new thing, you will find there are lots of help on our website, including videos on how to go about this. So some of the advantages of using this portal, once you've created an account, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, it gives more power to you as a user. So as you see there from those bullet points, you can look at managing your profile. From there you can make your funding applications, your funding decisions from us are communicated via it, and also those kind of monitoring conditions, payment conditions and claiming payments. So rather than having to email and not being completely sure where your email has gone, you can actually do this all through a web portal, and this should be helpful to you. The next slide, I hope this is visible to you all, but just this is a kind of a flow chart for what you need to do. First of all, create a user account and then create an applicant profile. It's worth just explaining the difference between those two things. So a user account effectively allows you to use that website. The applicant profile is really the name of the applicant. Those two things are different. What that means is that it enables you as a user to be involved with applications from different places. So for example, you may want to apply as yourself, but you also may be involved in an organization that wants to make an application. So you as a user can be involved in different applications. Step 3, you'll see a validation period. It's worth pointing this out. It will take us up to 5 working days to validate that profile. So if you're thinking about making an application, do make sure that you factor that time into your planning. And of course, whilst you're waiting for those 5 days to go past, there is all the other stuff on the website in terms of advice and guidance you can be reading through. So there is an eligibility questionnaire that will just guide you through making sure that what you're wanting to apply for is eligible, and then finally, once you're through all that, you will be able to start your application. Okay, the application form. It used to be, when I first started at the Arts Council, you were given a set of prompts to write to, and it was a case of writing 5,000 word essays in order to get money. Thankfully, and I think this is a good thing, we've actually moved more to a more form-based application that enables us to be more focused and more directive in terms of the questions that we're asking you. And you can relate these very easily back to the 4 criteria, which you see listed there, that we make our decisions on. So rather than having to read through a list of prompts and make sure in your 5,000 word essay you've matched up with all of them, you actually get to answer questions in boxes on the web form. The number of questions does flex depending on how much you are applying for. So the more money you ask for, we'll ask there are different things we ask you for: audience development plans, cash flows, etc. I would imagine that it's more likely you'll be applying for the lower levels here, so this is the lightest touch, and we're going to talk through this in a minute. As I've already mentioned, the scheme is split into 2 levels, so people applying for up to £15,000, and then this higher level of applying between £15,001 and £100,000. It's worth pointing out that most of the applications we receive are in that up to £15,000 level. And when I come on to talking about decision making, you'll see that there is a slightly lighter touch way that we deal with those applications. And of course, it has the advantage of having a 6-week turnaround instead of a 12-week turnaround. Finally there, you'll see again how to apply guidance, goes through the information we expect to see and takes you through step by step. So let's have a look at some of this now and talk about what the application form is looking for. So there are 4 main areas, as I've already said: artistic quality, public engagement, management and finance. Artistic quality. So we're looking here for several things. We're looking for evidence of your track record. We're looking for the strength of the artistic idea of what you're planning to do and how clear and well thought through that is. We're also asking you about artists you may be working with and what their experience is and what they bring to the table. What's worth pointing out here is that you can add attachments to your application form that might further demonstrate quality. However, I would encourage you to always make sure that what you fill in on the web form really captures everything that you're trying to do. If I was presenting this presentation in person, usually I would bring along a set of papers with me from the decision making so that you would see the volume of applications that we receive and that we need to get through in order to make decisions. What we can't guarantee is that we'll be able to go and look at all of the attachments that you add. So do make sure that you've got a real clarity to what you enter onto the application form. In terms of things like track record, what we're looking for here is what your previous experience is, so what work you've done before, and then we're looking for the relevance of that track record in relation to your artistic idea. When talking about your artistic idea, I think there are kind of 2 main things I'd say to this. One is that we are interested in the artistic thinking behind that idea, but we're also interested in the kind of nuts and bolts of how that idea will work out in practice. If you go too much to either one of those, it doesn't make for the best application. So I have seen applications where the kind of aesthetic ideas behind what is going to be done are really well explained, but then not explained how that activity is going to be realised. Conversely, not enough on the kind of the actual artistic idea and too much of the how it's going to be delivered. So there's a balance in there in getting those two things right. Public engagement. So this is the everyone bit in Great Art for Everyone. I think this is a really important part of the application form. And I think from my experience of looking over applications, this is the one thing that is really worth thinking about, because this is the one place that applications often fall down. So here we want to know who it is you want to engage with. You need to estimate the numbers of people you think are going to engage, and tell us more about those audiences and participants and how you're going to reach them. This, as I say, requires a bit of thought. So if, for example, you're putting on a concert, it's just saying our audience is our audience and we're going to attract them by making some flyers and sticking some adverts on the radio, is probably not enough. We want to see you thinking a little bit more about this, and actually to make a competitive application you do need to. From the Great Art for Everyone part, what we're interested in is about increasing opportunities. So we really want to see you thinking about how you might expand your audiences, your participants, about how you reach people who might not normally be able to engage. And I think particularly where you're working with participants, with participatory activity, how you're going to target your application to the people that most need that. Also very important in this, and we'll talk about this again a bit more in a minute, is the idea of partnerships and how partnerships help you support reaching people. This is particularly important, I think, if you're an individual artist. I would suggest that it's very hard for an individual artist working on their own to stage the kind of activity we're talking about here, to put on a concert, to do all the marketing, to do all the engagement. I think to make a really good application here, you need to think about who that audience is, who you're trying to reach, and who can help you do that. So it could be the venue that you're working with. It may also be, for example, that you're looking to fund a new commission that looks at, uses ideas from local history. In that kind of situation, think about who else might be interested in that. Who can you go and talk to? Local history groups, for example. Okay. Management. I think the previous two sections, the quality and the public engagement section, are probably the kind of the most exciting parts. Here we're into the kind of the nuts and bolts. So what we're looking for here is really that you have really thought about the activity you want to do, you've really thought about how you're going to do it, and you've really planned it well. So there is a section on the application form that will ask you to input a timeline. So here, as much detail as you can about the various steps you're going to go through and when you're going to do them in order to achieve your activity. Here also is where you'll put in details of your partners and who you're going to work with and what their experience is in running similar activity. Finally, we ask you to tell us how you're going to evaluate your activity. It's worth pointing out with evaluation that there are two things that we're looking for here. There are two kind of main threads to evaluation. One is about ongoing evaluation when you're actually running the project. How will you monitor it, make sure it's going well, and make necessary changes in order to deliver the best result? But also, how will you, at the end of the project, think about what and find out about what you've done, how successful it was, and how that will help you in the future. Okay, the finance section. You will need to put in a budget. There's a web form that helps you do this. The budget must balance, so it must be a kind of a zero budget, so income and expenditure equaling. I've not actually filled in one of these forms, but I believe that the form doesn't actually allow you to proceed unless you've actually got that budget to balance. The budget should cover the whole of the activity you're applying for, and you should have at least 10% match funding from other sources. It's worth stressing the at least part there, because what we're looking for you to do is to raise as much money as you can from other sources. There are a variety of places you can get that money from. That can be from other funders, from local authorities, but it's also things like earned income from selling tickets. You can include support in kind as match funding. Support in kind is actually quite a, it's worth explaining what we mean by that. So support in kind is where you would have had to pay for a service, but actually somebody is giving it to you for a reduced rate or for free. So this can be things like, for example, working with a venue where a venue reduces its fees to you, and so effectively you would have had to pay more, but some of that is being given to you. That is support in kind. It's quite important because we obviously live in financially restrained times, so sometimes this is an appropriate way for partners to work with you, but it also shows to us that you have buy-in from other partners. So this basically strengthens your project. In addition to providing a budget, there is also a written section, so it will ask you questions. You'll see I've listed there more information on your approach to raising as much money from other sources, your experience in managing budgets, and then finally details of how fees, rates and purchase costs have been arrived at. We want to make sure you're paying people properly, but we also want to make sure there's value for money in there as well. Okay, so I'm just going to talk very quickly about the process, just so you have a bit of an understanding of what goes on behind the scenes, and then I'm going to go into questions. So the first thing that happens once you submitted that application is it goes through an eligibility and risk check with our team in Manchester. What essentially they're doing is looking to see if it is eligible. Is it essentially what they're answering is the question, is this something we could in principle fund? So once they've said yes and passed that through, you're then into the decision-making process. There are two streams there which I've outlined. There is one for the under 15,000 applications and then one for the over 15,000 applications. Under 15,000 applications are taken weekly to decision-making panels and are read through, and then a proportion of those, usually around 50 to 60%, are funded. For the over 15,000 applications, this is a little bit more intensive, and these are appraised, assessed by relationship managers against set criteria, and then the decisions are made usually fortnightly at decision-making panels in the relevant area they've come from. It's very much a cycle, so this is an ongoing process. There are no deadlines. We deal with applications as they come through. It's also a cycle in that if you are unsuccessful, you will get told a reason why, and that does mean that you can actually resubmit. As long as you take into account that reasons, you can resubmit and put that application back in again. If you are applying for over £15,000, what you will get is you will get the full written appraisal that the relationship manager has made, and that will usually go through in a degree of detail as to where potential weaknesses were in your application, allowing you to address them. For the under 15,000, this is a bit more light touch because of the volume that we're dealing with here. And what you will get is a rejection letter that gives you the reason, usually in a few sentences, though it is quite brief, but it should be enough for you to be able to understand why your application was not successful. So a few things on here that I think I've already explained really. So the under 15,000 applications, 6 weeks turnaround, over 15,000, 12 weeks. Decisions made in the area. So yes, they go to Manchester first, but actually the decisions are all made on a more of a local basis, based on where the lead applicant is based. If you're unsuccessful, that letter will explain why, and then if you make that application, you should address the reasons why. This last slide is really some context for you. Excuse me, I'm just going to get a drink of water. Just to give you an idea of the volume that we're dealing with. and the level of competition that you face. So last year we received nearly 10,000 applications and we made just over 4,000 awards. So across the whole of the Grants for the Arts portfolio programme, there was a success rate of around 40%. That's actually quite high for most funders, but as you'll see there, that's essentially just less than 1 in 2 chance that your application is successful. We do always receive more good applications than we can fund. So I think one thing to think about is essentially, and this sounds a bit negative, but plan for failure. Plan what will happen if you don't get the money from us. It can't be counted on. And I have to say, as someone that regularly participates in decision-making panels, I do see an awful lot of good applications that don't get funded. Believe it or not, it's actually quite hard to say no. I don't like saying no, but we do have to do it. So, and then that kind of final tip there, provide the relevant information that we need. Do follow through those prompts. Do be specific. Do give as much concrete detail as you can. That's the best way to meet our criteria. Okay, so finally, there are a number of links on this slide. You won't be able to follow these, I don't think, from watching on your screen, but as I say, you should be able to get this presentation afterwards and follow those links. The first one I've given you there is probably the most important. That's the one that takes you through to the Grants for the Arts section of our website. And from there, a number of links take you through to the how to apply guidance and to our information sheets. Customer services number I put on there for you as well. I think, and I said this earlier, it's worth stressing, do read the website information first because it will help you. And then finally, some helpful videos. As I've said, there is a bit out of date, so there is some out of date information in them. However, there's some really good tips there. So there's an introduction that's fairly short. There is a little bit more on explaining the 4 key areas of the criteria that we've talked through. And then that last one there, I really enjoyed watching the last one. It's quite funny. It starts with outtakes, so don't be put off by that. They are there to be funny. And actually, it's a combination of relationship managers within the Arts Council and some external applicants talking about their experiences of applying and their tips for what makes a good application. Okay, that's the end of the presentation. I am going to have a look at some of these questions now, and I'm going to, in the next 15 or so minutes, try and answer as many as I can. Apologies if I don't get to everything, but let's do my best. Okay. So let's take the first question. This is from Arlene Smith, and thank you, Arlene. This question came in very early. This is about the difference between artistic or educational aspects of an event. So would we prefer to lean on the educational side of things or, as you said here, competition and performance? I think really it depends on what you want to do, what you're planning to do, and what is most appropriate. So I think, and you'll probably pick this up by now, there's a real key emphasis here on public benefit. Who are you trying to reach and what are you trying to get across to them? That doesn't mean that it has to be all about running education projects, but you do need to consider particularly how you might engage with new audiences and what that experience is for them and what they take away from it. So yes to educational events where those are appropriate. Don't feel you have to add educational elements to a project. That's not all you have to do just to make it eligible. So yes, of course we fund performance. Competitions, I think, are an interesting one. Again, it's about the experience. What are the participants getting out of it? What are the audiences getting out of it? Okay. So, on our next question, this is also from Eileen, on the finance section of the application form, why is it that the outgoings and incomings have to balance? It's a good question, actually, and I haven't thought of this. They do have to balance because we need to see effectively that you're not making a profit from it, but I take your point that the issue is that you're not getting enough income. When I say the budget has to balance, it has to balance including what you're asking of us. I hope that makes sense. So you may be bringing in £1,000 from a local trust and foundation. You may be estimating that you're going to raise several £100s in ticket income, but actually you know it's going to cost you £8,000 to put on your event. The difference between the income and expenditure there is what you're applying to us for. So that's what I mean by a balanced budget. Okay. I've got a question here about the time limited and what this means. So the question is, could this be something that occurs every 3 years, but just for 1 week at a time? Potentially yes, but I think you'd be applying for it on, you wouldn't be applying for something to, you'd be applying for it when it happened, if you see what I mean. So you'd be putting an application in once every 3 years. Important point comes out of that question about repeat activity. Grants for the Arts really has a kind of a developmental remit, so it is not there to fund ongoing activity. So making a case for doing the same thing again does take some thinking about. What we look for is a level of development. This particularly applies to things like festivals, for example, which happen on potentially an annual basis. Well, you could argue that that festival happening in, say, July every year is repeat activity. However, what we're looking for is that you continue to develop that activity. So yes, it might be through the program, but it might also be through the audiences you're trying to reach. Okay, another good question here from Pavel about the technicalities of using the application portal. Can more than one user access the same applicant profile? The answer to that is yes, and actually that is a benefit of using the system that we do. So that means that you can have several people working on an application at the same time. So each of those people that's going to work on it needs to set themselves up as users, but once the applicant itself is set up, you can then have several users who are able to access that application. Okay, question here from Stephen about performances in England and performances in Europe. And he's asking, is it a case that Arts Council might fund the activities that are happening in the UK, but other parts will have to be funded from elsewhere? Yes is a simple answer to that. So you can present all of that within one budget. You'd be looking for us to support the activities happening in England, but it might be that within your budget you have funds coming in from other sources that are supporting the activity that's happening outside of England. That applies to Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland as well. So if you are taking stuff to Scotland and you have more than the kind of minimum 15% that we talk about, we'd be looking for that part of the activity to be funded by potentially Creative Scotland, Scotland's version of the Arts Council, or other funders in Scotland. Okay, so I'm trying to read through all, there's some great questions coming in here, I'm trying to read through them all quickly. Question about artistic quality and creating an event as a festival, educational festival, etc. Describing our inaugural event as our artistic work, or would you talk about the international musicians that are involved in the event, is the question. Both is the answer. So when you talk about you and your work, you will be talking about the inaugural event, but you will be also being asked about the artists that you're intending to work with. If you know who those artists are, there is a section of the application form where you can list all of those and their relevant track records. However, I think we're talking about a competition here where you might not know who's going to be entering that competition. You can talk instead about how you're going to reach those people who are going to be applying and what kind of level you're expecting from them. Question here about music education organisations. This is a good question. This is from Martin, who is not receiving any funding from the local music hub, but has spotted that we do have restrictions on our website about working with music education hubs. And Martin is asking, would we still be able to apply for grants for activities that do not receive any funding from the hub? This is quite a complicated area, and I could probably spend at least another hour talking about music education hubs and working with them. I think to answer your question, Martin, that yes, of course, you can apply to us for a music education activity that is not funded by the hub. However, if you are working in partnership with a music education hub, you do need to ensure that when you submit your application, you have what we call a permission to apply letter from us. So this actually goes through the hub itself, and the hub needs to request this from their relationship manager. They will understand that and should know what that means. It's worth reiterating, of course, we do fund music education activity that doesn't involve music education hubs. However, I would encourage you strongly to work where you can in partnership with your music education hubs. This isn't always about them giving you money, but it's about best value for money, and it's about them helping you realise that activity and reach the people that it most needs to. Question here from a CD recording project. Recordings are a tricky one, yeah, I'm kind of slightly hesitating in my answer to this. It is possible. It is absolutely possible. I think an application that focuses purely on making a recording can be tricky because it can be looked at as being self-promotion. However, where you build that recording into a wider project, it can become more successful. There could be several reasons that you're doing that. One is to archive the project, so keep a digital record of it. Also, we recognise that recordings are a good way of reaching other audiences and new audiences, wider audiences. So, for example, you might be in a band that wants to go on tour with live performances. You want to have a CD that you take with you and that you sell. So again, that could be part of your project. Do remember, of course, if you're selling that recording, you're going to be generating income. So we'd want to see that on the income side of the budget as well. Okay, I'm running out of time. So I'm looking very quickly through to try and find some good questions to finish at the end. Okay. Question here about arts and health. This is a good question from Liz. If the project was an arts and health project which had a potential positive outcome to health and well-being, would that be considered? The answer is yes, and there's quite a focus on arts and health at the moment. It fits very well with our kind of idea of this holistic value of arts and culture, that there's more to the arts than just arts for art's sake, that actually it also has other positive outcomes. I think what I'd say though when thinking about your application is think about who you're applying to. So we're the Arts Council, and yes, we want to see the arts being used in positive situations like that. So yes, we are interested in what those positive outcomes are in terms of health or well-being, but do also think about the artistic outcomes too. It's the artistic outcomes that we're most interested in. Think also in that situation about who else could be funding you. So it could be a case of working with your local health trust, your local hospital or hospice, etc. And essentially we'd be looking to see that they had some kind of financial stake in it as well. Okay. A question here about, this is a good question, from Robin, who is asking about seeking grants of the arts funding for an event in a venue which is already an NPO. He's asking, is this still possible? They're offering support in kind by reducing costs, however the costs are still large and need to be met. So the answer to the question here is yes, that's fine. I think So essentially you're working with an NPO, and yes, they are funded already. However, we don't expect them to take on absolutely everything that comes to them, and so it is appropriate that they're reducing their cost to you. I think there's probably more there you could be talking to them about in terms of partnership, about things like marketing, reaching an audience. But yes, so of course, yes, you can work with NPOs. Where it becomes problematic is when too much of the money starts flowing essentially the wrong way. They're there to support the art sector as well. So it's, as I say, it's good that they're looking to support you with support in kind. I have only a few minutes left, so just scanning down to see what I can answer for you here. So a question here from Liz about factoring a certain amount of remuneration to time to run the project. Yes, that's absolutely possible, and I talked about that a bit earlier. So we talk about that as in terms of something called full cost recovery. So we won't pay your salary, but we will pay a proportion of that, the proportion that is needed to run the project. A question here about the online application forms. This is a tricky one, and I understand, I can see this is from Martin, who is, online application forms can be tricky. There is a lot of explanatory notes. However, and what Martin's asking is there some way they can download the questions posed in the online form. I can't definitively answer that for you here, Martin. I'd like to be able to. I think the best thing to do in that situation is actually to phone up the customer inquiries number and see what they can do to help you. I know that this is an issue and is something that's being thought about, so the kind of access challenges that poses are something that we're very much aware of. And I appreciate your kind of, what you're looking for here is to be able to pass those questions around so that other people can help you in answering them. And that's a good point. Do phone our customer inquiries number with that one. Okay, I have 3 minutes left, so I've probably got time for one more quick question. Question here from Eileen about holding singing/music therapy workshops involving inviting a practitioner from abroad to collaborate on the event. Can they apply for a grant to help fund that person's travel? The answer is yes, absolutely. It does add, though, to the cost of your application, and so there is a value for money consideration. So what you need to make sure you get across here is, in terms of their track record, why do you need to invite somebody in from abroad? What is it? What is the benefit of bringing them in from abroad to artists and audiences in England? So that's absolutely possible. Yes, it can be done, but as I say, do consider the value for money and about what additional experience that artist is bringing with them. Okay, unfortunately, I'm going to run out of time. There's some really good questions coming in here, and I'm really very sorry if I haven't been able to answer everything for you. I have included our customer inquiries number, as I said, at the end of the slide, so do use that to get in touch. Do have a read through, and yeah, I wish you the best of luck with applying to Grants for the Arts. Thank you very, very much for being with me today. Thank you.